Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, articles, research notes, and, well, we try to boil them down to the core insights.
Exactly. Find those nuggets of knowledge.
And today we're diving into something that's thankfully rare, but when it happens, aviation disasters. They just leave such a mark.
They really do. You know, flying is incredibly safe statistically. It's a marvel, really. But those rare times things go wrong. They're catastrophic. The impact just ripples outwards, affects so many people, changes how we think about risk.
Absolutely. So our mission today, we're calling it Echoes in the Sky. We're looking at two really significant Air India tragedies. Very different incidents, actually.
Right. Decades apart, different causes.
Yeah, but we want to go beyond just the facts. We'll dig into the human stories, the long shadow they cast, and the lessons. What did we learn? Or maybe what are we still learning?
That's key.
We'll pull insights from a historical event that really truly shaped national security and also look at a very recent incident, something that just happened.
Okay, where do we start?
Let's begin with Air India Flight 182. Many would say this was a defining moment, certainly for Canada, but also for global aviation security. Can you sort of set the scene for us?
Yeah, sure. So we're going back to June 23rd, 1985. Air India Flight 182, a Boeing 747, was flying towards India.
Okay.
And tragically, a bomb exploded on board. It went down over the Atlantic off the coast of Ireland.
The loss of life. Just stab.
It was immense. All 329 people on board, passengers and crew, were lost. Every single one.
And those numbers, they're almost too big to comprehend, but the sources really break down the human cost, don't they?
They do. It's heartbreaking when you look closer. 137 of those lost were children, under 18.
Wow.
And 82 were under 13 years old. Think about that.
It's just...
And then you have the families, 29 entire families just wiped out, gone. And another 32 people who lost their whole immediate family on that flight.
Unimaginable grief. The sources also note the demographics involved?
Yes. The majority of victims were Hindus, mostly from southern Ontario in Canada. But the investigation pointed towards the perpetrators being extremist Sikhs based in British Columbia.
Okay, so how did they actually manage to get a bomb onto the plane? The mechanics of it are quite chilling.
They are. It wasn't placed directly on Flight 182 initially. The bomb was hidden in checked baggage.
Right.
That bag was first checked onto a Canadian Pacific Flight CP Air, flying from Vancouver to Toronto.
Okay, so a domestic Canadian flight first.
Exactly. And then in Toronto, that bag was interlined, meaning it was transferred over to Air India Flight 181, which then continued as Flight 182.
And wasn't there some issue with checking that bag? I remember reading something.
Yeah, a really stark detail. The ticket agent apparently initially refused to interline the bag. The ticket itself wasn't confirmed for the Air India leg. But the man checking it in, using the name Manjeet Singh, he insisted, and eventually she relented and checked it through.
Just a small decision with enormous consequences. And this wasn't the only bomb, was it?
No, and that's what makes it even more chilling. The coordination. At almost the exact same time as the Flight 182 bombing, another bomb exploded. This one was at Narita Airport in Tokyo. It was also hidden in baggage from a CP Air flight that originated in Vancouver, linked to the same plotters.
And people were killed there, too.
Yes, tragically. 2 cargo handlers in Tokyo died when that bomb went off prematurely. It just shows the scale and intent of this operation.
So who was ultimately responsible? Which group and individuals?
The primary group, blamed by investigators, was the Babar Khalsa militants. It's a Sikh extremist group.
Okay.
And key individuals often named are Talwinder Singh Parmar, considered a leader. And remarkably, he was actually under surveillance by CSIS, Canada's spy agency, before the bombing.
Before? Wow. That's significant.
It is. And then there was Inderjit Singh Rayat. He was identified as the bomb maker.
Right. The sources go into some detail about his methods, don't they?
They do. It mentions he used things like a Micron digital car clock.
The car clock.
Yeah, and an electrical relay. These were the components designed to trigger the detonator. The sources even mention he did a sort of test blast earlier, which failed.
So they knew he was experimenting.
Well, the level of detail about his purchases, his phone calls with Parmar, it suggests CSIS had a fair bit of intelligence beforehand, which leads us straight into the whole investigation and justice side of things.
Yeah, and that path was, well, troubled seems like an understatement. The legal aftermath dragged on for years. Very frustrating for the families.
Extremely. You had the main trial, which resulted in the acquittals of Ripudaman Singh Malik and Ajay Singh Bagri in 2005.
Right. And Malik, he was actually killed years later, wasn't he, in 2022?
That's correct. Riyad, the bomb maker, his legal path was different, though.
How so?
He actually pleaded guilty earlier on to manslaughter related to constructing the bomb. But then, much later, in 2010, he was convicted of perjury.
Lying in court.
Yes, for lying during the trial of Malik and Bagri. He got a 9-year sentence for that. And the judge's comment at the time was quite powerful.
What was that?
He said Riyad behaved like a man still committed to a cause. It really speaks to this perceived lack of remorse, this ongoing commitment to the ideology behind the attack.
And amidst all this, there's the huge controversy about destroyed evidence, specifically the CSIS wiretaps.
Yes, that's a critical point. It's staggering, really. CSIS apparently erased 156 out of 210 wiretap recordings.
Even after they had suspects identified.
Yes, even after. The agent responsible later testified he felt morally obliged to destroy them to protect his sources. He feared they'd be killed if their identities were revealed through the tapes in court.
Protect the source versus secure a conviction. That's a tough spot.
It's a classic agonizing dilemma for intelligence agencies everywhere, isn't it? The RCMP, the National Police Force, believed that if those tapes hadn't been destroyed, a successful prosecution might have been possible.
So potential justice denied because of intelligence protocols.
That's certainly the argument. It really highlights this fundamental tension, the intelligence evidence debate. The need to protect sources for ongoing security versus the need to provide evidence for criminal trials. Where do you draw the line? It's not just a Canadian issue. It's global.
A really difficult balance.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. Beyond the investigation, the enduring impact on people, on families, it's just immense.
Absolutely. Decades later, the echoes are still felt so strongly.
In the immediate aftermath, there was a sort of contrast in how people felt supported, right?
Very much so. Many families felt, and the sources use words like abandonment and mistreatment by the Canadian government.
Really? How so?
Well, for instance, apparently no Canadian officials were even present in Ireland for the first 6 days after the bombing. And it took until 2005, 20 years later, for a Canadian prime minister to attend a memorial service there.
20 years. Wow. That sends a message.
It does. But then you contrast that feeling of sort of official neglect with the response from the people in Cork, Ireland.
Ah, yes. The sources mention that warmth.
Overwhelmingly. Families express deep gratitude for the generosity, outpouring of concern, selfless behavior, and love from the ordinary citizens of Cork. People just opened their hearts, their homes, taxi drivers, priests, hospital staff. Everyone pitched in.
That human connection in the face of horror.
Exactly. Those bonds formed then, they still remain strong for many of the families.
And we shouldn't forget the first responders, the rescuers, the trauma they must have experienced.
Oh, absolutely. The sources mention Mark Stagg, an officer on one of the first ships at the scene, recovering bodies.
Yeah.
He said, quite starkly, "The boy in me died that day." Just captures the horror. Another rescuer, Shawnee Murphy, apparently took his boat 110 miles out, way beyond their normal range, just to help.
They carry that with them.
Forever. It's a heavy burden, a silent cost to these kinds of tragedies.
The sources also give us glimpses into individual lives lost, which really helps understand the human dimension.
Yes, those stories are so important. They make the number 329 real. Like Mohan Rani Katra, known as Nana.
Tell us about her.
Described as an emancipated woman, originally from Kashmir. She was flying to India to celebrate her 60th birthday. Ironically, the source notes she felt safer boarding Air India 182, safer than if she'd been in Srinagar at the time.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
Isn't it? Then there was Dr. Anshanat Alexander, a cardiac surgeon who'd immigrated to Canada. His dream was to eventually return to India to use his skills to help people who couldn't afford care.
A life of service cut short.
Exactly. And Ardishir K. Nayati, a retired Marine engineer, the only Baha'i member on the flight. He was heading to India to sort out selling property so he could finalize his retirement back in Canada.
Just everyday plans, everyday lives.
Absolutely. And the story of Deepak Khandelwal.
The young man.
Yeah, who apparently had this premonition of death. Said goodbye to his furniture before leaving. His mother, Dr. Padmini Trilapati, identified his body later, recalling an expression of pain on his face.
God, that's harrowing.
It is. And another mother, Donna Ramapal, who identified her children's bodies, she explicitly stated she felt abandoned by the Canadian government. These personal accounts really drive home the depth of loss and that feeling of being let down.
But amidst all that darkness, there's also incredible resilience, isn't there? People channeling grief into something positive.
Yes, that's a really powerful theme in the sources, this post-traumatic growth. It's extraordinary.
Can you give some examples?
Well, Dr. Chandrasekarathri lost his wife, son, and daughter on the flight. Utterly devastating.
I can't even imagine.
But he went on to establish an eye hospital, the Sri Kiran Institute of Ophthalmology, and a school back in India. They provide free or low-cost care. He said science existed to better the lot of people, just turning tragedy into service.
Incredible.
And Sushil Gupta, he was only 12 when his mother died on the flight. He apparently suffered from guilt, developed a chronic illness linked to the trauma.
Yeah.
But he became a federal prosecutor. He wanted to work on the side of justice, as he put it, in memory of his mother.
Finding purpose through pain.
Exactly. Or Kalwant Mamak, who lost his wife. He learned to cook something she used to do, and now he volunteers his cooking skills for charity events. And his kids went into law enforcement. One daughter even got a doctorate in forensic sciences and speaks internationally on terrorism.
Wow, legacy in action.
And you also see numerous scholarships set up in victims' names. Families like the Khandelwals, Murthy Subramanian, Mahesh Sharma, turning loss into educational opportunities for others.
It's truly inspiring. So looking at the bigger picture then, Flight 182 really forced Canada to wake up to a new reality, didn't it?
Absolutely. It was Canada's harsh introduction into the modern age of terrorism, as one source put it. It wasn't just an accident. It was mass murder planned and executed with connections to Canadian soil.
And that forced changes in security.
Big changes. The focus shifted dramatically. Before 182, aviation security was mainly about preventing hijackings. Afterwards, the big focus became checked baggage screening.
Makes sense. What were some of the concrete steps taken?
Well, Transport Canada created a dedicated security directorate. They increased the number of security personnel, put more money into R&D for security tech, and completely overhauled the regulation.
Leading to
the requirement that all checked baggage in Canada had to be screened, which came into full effect by January 1st, 2006, a direct result of the vulnerabilities exposed by Flight 182.
So, massive systemic changes. Yeah, you mentioned that poll from just this year, 2025.
Yeah, on the anniversary, June 23rd. A poll indicated a majority of Canadians still feel the bombing hasn't really been treated as a national tragedy in the way maybe other events have.
So there's still this sense of incompletion, or maybe lack of full national recognition.
It suggests an ongoing public reckoning, perhaps, a feeling that its place in the national memory or the lessons learned haven't fully sunk in for everyone.
Okay, Flight 182, a historical event with profound, lasting consequences. Now let's jump forward. Decades later, another Air India tragedy, but very different circumstances. Flight 171, which happened just recently, June 2025.
Yes, a very current event. This one occurred in Ahmedabad, India.
What do we know about the immediate situation after the crash?
Well, the initial reports were chaotic, as you'd expect. The crash happened near student hostels, medical student hostels.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, so immediately, at least 50 students from those hostels needed hospitalization due to the impact, the fire. And initial reports said 10 to 12 people were actually trapped inside the burning wreckage or buildings. A major emergency right away.
Just awful. But amidst this very recent tragedy, there's an almost unbelievable story of survival.
There is. It's quite remarkable, frankly. The sources focus on a sole survivor, a 40-year-old British citizen.
And how did he survive?
He was apparently sitting in seat 11A, which was right next to an emergency exit. During the crash sequence, his section of the plane actually broke away.
Broke away?
Yes, detached from the main fuselage and came to rest on the ground floor of one of those nearby hostel buildings.
Incredible.
And somehow, he managed to unbuckle his seatbelt. The emergency exit near him had broken open on impact, creating an opening, and he managed to escape through that.
Did he escape unharmed?
Not entirely. He suffered burns, apparently to his left hand, and was understandably disoriented. But the key thing doctors reported was that he was no longer in danger.
A miracle, really, but laced with tragedy, too.
Absolutely. Because tragically, his brother, who was also on the flight but seated in a different row, did not survive. It just underscores the sheer randomness, the terrible lottery of survival in these events.
Yeah. So the investigation into this crash is obviously still in its very early stages.
Very early. India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, the AAIB, is leading it. But they're getting help from international bodies, the UK, the US, Boeing as the manufacturer.
Standard procedure, usually.
Yes, and interestingly, anti-terror squads are also involved, which often happens initially with major air incidents just to rule things out quickly, although there's no indication of terrorism here so far.
What are the main challenges for the investigators in this specific case? You mentioned fire.
Yes, the fire was intense. That means investigators are particularly reliant on the black box data, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder.
Because the physical wreckage is too damaged.
Exactly. So much of the plane itself will likely be unrecoverable or too badly damaged by fire to yield clear clues. Recovering and analyzing those black boxes is absolutely crucial.
What else are they looking at?
They're also gathering CCTV footage from the area, talking to any witnesses, of course. And specifically, initial reports mentioned they're looking into why the landing gear was apparently deployed and whether there were any issues with the wing flaps during the approach, trying to piece together the final moments.
It's painstaking work, especially with limited physical evidence.
It really is. It relies heavily on modern forensic techniques and data analysis.
So as we sort of wrap up this deep dive, we've looked at two very different Air India tragedies. Flight 182, a deliberate act of terror decades ago, and Flight 171, a very recent crash with causes still under investigation.
Yeah, completely different circumstances, different eras.
But both, in their own way, they really hammer home the fragility of air safety, even with all our modern advancements.
They do. And they both highlight the devastating, long-lasting impact these events have on individuals, on families, entire communities, even on nations.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? As technology improves, as security hopefully gets better, how do we make sure we actually honor the past? How do we remember the stories of those lost, the grief of those left behind?
That's the crucial question. Are we ensuring that these incredibly hard-learned lessons, paid for at such an immense human cost, are truly embedded, not just in procedures, but in our collective vigilance?
Right. What role do we all play, perhaps, in just remembering these events, understanding their complexity, and maybe advocating for that continuous vigilance, ensuring we don't become complacent? Something to definitely keep thinking about.